Okay, so as Stephanie said, I recall back to Dr. Whitaker yesterday morning and her lovely introduction to us, and so many things stood out to me from her keynote. One of them in particular, which resonated because it's the way we've structured this session, is taking learning tours from each other. And I really want to approach this session as a learning tour. We're going to kind of break it down into three parts. I'm going to share with you some things that I have had success with in my classes with my writers. I've tried to keep those examples fairly, they can be adapted cross-curricularly. I teach writing. I have been a writing instructor for 30 years. I teach English classes, but as we know, writing happens across the board. So hopefully some of these will be adaptable, applied, but then we're going to pause and we really want to hear from you. What works for you? What doesn't work for you? How some of these strategies might help as your students are working through Mizzou Academy writing assignments in particular, or what we can offer. So we'll be doing a lot of that sharing and learning touring together. So to kick that off, I do want to start with a couple of Jamboards just to get a sense of where we all are together. Stephanie, if you want to share the first one. So the first thing we just kind of want to hear from you, and let me, with our essential question is kind of, how do we connect students with deep writing? And I just kind of want to get a sense, how are your kids feeling right now? Like if you had to pick one word to describe how your students react when they are faced with a writing assignment or when you introduce a writing activity into class, how do they seem to feel about it? And we're gonna have Stephanie, I hope, start a Jamboard on that. If not, drop it in the chat. Well, mez. Not happy. Yeah, meh, challenged, frustrated. Yeah. That's kind of what I get a lot too. Sometimes even in my writing classes, or students bored. Oh, that's an important one. We're gonna tackle that one today, hopefully. Yeah, agree. Okay, so we're getting the sense of this. Let's go ahead. Let's move to the next question, just to keep things moving, because I think we're all feeling that. Okay, so if you could name a barrier or two, like if they're feeling meh and bored, not excited, having trouble getting started, what did you think is standing in their way? What are you experiencing that is getting in the way of them getting excited or getting started? And feel free to speak too. You're not relegated to the chat or the Jamboard if we can get it going. Lack of practice, skills, strategies. We're getting into this too. Oh, you guys are right in the heart of where we want to go today. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next slide and break off. I think, like I said, it sounds like we're all kind of in the same place, right? So the first thing I want to do is kind of talk about what we mean when we talk about the writing process. And I think, all of us, we know brainstorming, pre-writing, drafting, revising, editing. We're not going to go over all of those steps. We know them, we've heard them. But what I really want to do is kind of deconstruct what we mean by them. What are we really wanting our writers to do or to experience at each stage along the writing journey to get to that end? So let me define some terms, what I mean by deep writing. And what I mean by that is that it is writing of any kind that means something to them. It is where they have a purpose, where they are connecting with what they're doing. But in this particular context, I am going to be talking about writing that, at least in some capacity, is designed for publication. Somebody else is going to read it. we know that there can be incredibly important deep writing that happens in journaling, in, personal creation and things that nobody else is ever meant to see. And I am not disregarding that, but we are talking specifically in the classroom where there are some stakes. There's going to be a grade attached, or they're nervous about somebody else reading it. It's communication. It's writing for the purposes of connecting and communication. So I like to think of the writing process as almost more like a writing journey. And like all journeys, there is value and reward that happens at every step along the way, not just at the end destination. But of course, we know that rewarding does not always equal fun. And thus, we start with this meme. It's a process. Writing for me as a writer is usually really scary and frustrating and infuriating and embarrassing before it ever feels inspired. And my students express the similar, let's call it dread. Usually when they're faced with an assignment or writing project, it is not what they want to be doing. And they're really worried about how it's going to turn out. So we're going to try to get underneath the surface of some of those steps and instead sort of look at philosophies and deep writing practice and look at some examples of how we do that. So as a writing instructor, my thesis is that for deep writing, the steps, those 5 steps of the writing process, actually break down into 3 essential aims. The first one is to engage, right? And if we want to pull up the verb engage. They have to engage genuinely with the topic, the idea, or the purpose for writing. And we'll go into some ways to work on engagement. The second is plan and manage. And these are the necessary action steps that we all have to take to put our thoughts and our feelings into words. And we have to, I know they said, they don't have the practice. We have to teach them how to do that and give them the steps to follow. And the third is about voice. How to find and express and value our own individual voice and contributions to the world. So these are not just writing skills, right? These are life skills: curiosity, time management, growth mindset, human connection and communication, self-awareness and self-evaluation and self-expression. And these are the things that happen when we write deeply. So let's talk about the first one. Next slide, please, Stephanie. So let's talk about engage. So the first thing is that we need to have our students to get some buy-in, right? Some kind of genuine investment in or curiosity about the topic or the task of what we're asking them to do. So thinking back to our non-Jamboard activity, but our chat. One more back. We know that they're not always excited. They're a little nervous. And I find that this kind of falls into 3 general buckets. Apathy. I don't care about this. This does not matter to me in my life. I am doing this because you're telling me to do it. I don't care. The second is stress or pressure. This happens a lot to our overachievers, to the people who are very grade focused. And sometimes just because we know life is overwhelming. For us, for our kids, there is a lot to do. It's just, there's pressure. And the third is confusion or frustration. I don't get this assignment. I don't understand what you want from me. Or I also kind of put into this bucket the ones that just, I'm not a good writer. They've just kind of given up before they started and they're just frustrated that we're asking them to do it. If you can think of any other buckets that I have missed in terms of barriers to engagement, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll talk about them when we pause to kind of gather here at the end. So how can we use the early stages of the writing process to help students engage with writing in more meaningful ways? I'm going to share a few strategies with you that have been, lack of focus, that's a good one, that have been successful for me, and then we'll pause and talk about it. Okay, next slide, please. Yes, ideas. So why do we write? As I've been doing this for 30 years, and I will be completely honest with you, the one question that used to make me crazy and scare me is this one that students always ask: why do we need to know this? Why are we doing this? How does this help me in my life? Now it is absolutely my favorite question. I love it when they ask me why we need to do this. And if we're going to engage students with writing, of course they need to know why it's important. So I really am a genuine believer in sharing with them before I ever ask them to do anything, why. It's the first thing I bring to them. Why are we going through this? What is the point? And in general, whatever your subject area, the act of writing is how we catch and collect and sometimes discover too our ideas. Our thoughts run all over the place, and so often they are gone before we can even think them fully or process them, and certainly before we can do anything with them. So writing gathers and contains and organizes and records all of those gems and jewels that we don't want to lose. And our writers are more likely to engage if they understand that why we're asking them to do it. Next slide, please. Another pretty potent way that I have found to engage students with writing, and I have found this to be especially true with my reluctant or frustrated readers, is first to empower them. They don't always recognize that they are already writers. They are sharing their views and opinions and observations about the world all the time, every day, on social media, when they're arguing in the comments, when they're in gaming and they're doing an ongoing chat session. They are writing. When they are sending email questions to me or filling out online forms and applications, they are writing. When they are, oh my gosh, all the texting, they are sharing, they are supporting, they are laughing, they are working together in common cause in their group chats. It is all writing. And I got to say, and I really want to emphasize this with my kids, because this is where I see them connect. Genuinely and sincerely, what these kids can do with a meme caption when they are offering social commentary on things going on in the world today. They are funny, they are brilliant, they are clever thinkers and wordsmiths, and they have things to say. They are doing it all the time. And broadly speaking, they write a lot more than I ever did day to day when I was in high school. They're just doing it in a different format. They're doing it on their phones. They're doing it, on all of their devices. And most of them would rather write, right? They'd rather text than answer the phone or, God forbid, answer the door. I relate to it. So they are writers. And I have really seen those light bulbs flip on for them just when I take a moment to show them that I see that, that I see their strengths and their skills. They already have them, and their job in a writing task is to build on them so that those skills can grow as their needs in life grow, in school, for work, all of those things. So for example, and again, I harken back to Dr. Whitaker's comments about those first 5 minutes. In engagements, instead of asking them to start brainstorming writing ideas for a task, right? I start by just asking them for their hot takes. For example, Stephanie, if you want to go to the next slide. And try to frame, and I'm sure that language is probably already out of date because I'm old and they'll laugh at me for it. But, they seem to buy into it now. But rather than sitting them down to a piece of paper, I want to just actually take a moment to be curious about what they are thinking and feeling about the topic or the material that we've been studying in class. And I try to use some fun and familiar situations that they would ordinarily bring their ideas to the table. So I might ask them, hey, if you were sitting around your dinner table and someone asked you about this, what would you say? Get them thinking about it and talking about it before they start writing about it. What would you post about it? If you were just hopping onto Snapchat or X or Facebook, I don't do social media, I don't know, whatever's popular now. What would you say about it? What would you say about it in a private group chat? Would that be different from what you'd put on your public post, and why? And get them thinking before they start writing. Next slide, please. And this one this is again a first 5 minutes thing. This is before they get going. If they walk into the room, I might put something up, and they've probably seen this meme, you've probably seen this meme, but you can put anything you want on that sandwich board, right? If I'm teaching Romeo and Juliet, I might put up there, Juliet's father was right. Changed my mind, right? Same thing if you're studying something else, caption it. Give them an image. If it's history or science, give them an image, something visual of what's going on, and just ask them to caption it. What they can do with inference in that moment, recognizing theme, drawing conclusions. If they can just write a caption, it's going to connect them with that. I also love this. Is shout out to Jill Klingon, who got me texts from Jane Eyre a few years back, changed my life. But these are available all over the place to even, have up on the board or something. If you're reading something complex, kind of put it in text form or have them put it in text form. They can role play a little bit. If you're reading literature, have them take some characters and just write texts back and forth and get them into these familiar exchanges where they can find their voices and connect to some of the ideas. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so those are ways to connect with ideas, largely when it's an open assignment and they're trying to find what they want to say. In other forums, they need to answer a writing prompt, right? And one of the first things I want to engage with is actually to interrogate the prompt. They need to know what it is we're asking them to do. And so this comes back to some of the skills and practices that we were talking about in the opening chat. So we teach them critical reading skills, right? All the time. You're going to read this passage, you're going to read this part of the textbook, and we ask them to read it critically. I want to remind them to take those skills to a writing prompt. What we are asking them to do is there for them. And if they can go through and actually circle or highlight the action words of a prompt and figure out what we want them to do, and then underline those, like most of the prompt is going to say, tell me about the figurative language, or tell me about this formula that we use. It's going to be in there in the prompt. And if they can bring their reading skills to their writing, that's going to help them engage with what it is they need to do. And we'll come back to this in another moment. So let's go to the next slide, please. So this is one that I actually use in my AP English class. So the sample, we've read stories in which the main character's blind spot prevents them from seeing an important or meaningful truth about themselves. In a complete and well-constructed essay, analyze how the writer reveals the character's blind spot and how, in turn, this characterization reveals the story's theme. There is a lot in that prompt, right? So the first thing I want them to do is just go through and look at, what are we asking you to do? I want you to analyze. I want you to look at what the writer is revealing about the character's blind spot, and then I want you to connect that to theme. So teaching them how to read those prompts actively and critically is going to help them get moving. Okay. Next slide, please. The next thing I really like to do in the engagement phase is embrace learning styles. And I think we do this in a lot of areas and sometimes forget to apply it to this early part of the writing process. I, for one, know that when I have a big task or project in front of me, especially one I may not already feel excited about, I will do one of two things. I will go for a walk or I will take a shower. The one thing I will not do is sit down at my desk, staring at a clock ticking away, trying to force myself to write. That's not where my best thinking happens. And our students are like that too. They think in different ways in different styles. Now, for some of them, sitting down and setting a timer and write as many things as you can think is going to help get those juices flowing. But for a lot of them, that actually restricts their ability to connect and engage. So whenever I can, I try to preview my writing assignments in advance in order to give students a chance to think about the topic in their own way, in their own time. Can I at least make some space during class time to invite them to get up and walk around, or to do some sketching or doodling, to kind of doodle it out, or to gather in small groups or with a partner to kind of talk. If they're more verbal, talk about this. What are some ideas that you can do? So, just like us, they already know how and when and where they do their best thinking. And then I ask them to collect those thoughts in the recorded form of writing, and then they can start the writing process with drafting. So at this stage, It may not look like anything that makes sense to us yet. I have seen some sketches and some doodles that, okay, sure, but that's okay. Celebrate it. This is where we can encourage them to discover or to discard or to explore and investigate and to trust and to test their instincts. And so once they've done that, hopefully they are more engaged and ready to actually start writing. So those are a few things I've done that works well for me. Let's take a moment to pause, process that. Any questions that you have for me, I buzzed through them, or what works for you? What have you found in your classrooms and writing practice that helps get students to engage with writing? I can't see the chat. I need to get my chat going.
And please feel free to say it out too. I know you all, and you have a lot to share, and we'd love to hear it. Things that, yeah, here, the chat's going. I finally figured, oh my gosh, I need lessons on Zoom after all these years. I got the pull the chat over.
Oh, there we go. Yeah, I wasn't seeing it either. Okay. Yeah, purpose, meaning, choices. Yeah, that's another thing. It's like I really want to empower kids, and this we'll talk about. I didn't get into writing prompts in this one, which I think is so important, but honoring choices, and wherever I can, giving student choice. Here's like, if there are certain learning objectives, if I can give them a choice of 2 or 3 different ways to approach it so that they have some power in that, and some choice makes a huge difference. I want to hear more about Snowball.
Yeah, me too.
Tell me if you're comfortable, Heidi, can you share Snowball with us?
Yeah, sure. So it's something that I do in order to get them to write something. And it does not put them on the spot. So last time I tried it, it didn't work out very well because it was a group that was kind of rowdy. So they ended up throwing the balls at each other. It was not cool, but usually it works pretty well. So what I give them an image and maybe the theme or the topic that we're going to discuss, but no more than that. And they have 30 seconds. Each person has 30 seconds to write whatever they want on a piece of paper. And then they write their names, on the piece of paper. Then they write about the picture, 30 seconds. Then they roll it up into a ball and throw it to the next person. So in the end, I play like 5 rounds in the end. They get their balls back and they have like they have to summarize what they see from all the answers there on the paper. So it's really fun.
I love that.
Yeah, and it's for me it works because it makes them write without them getting the stress. So it's fun. It involves movement, and as long as they are not throwing the balls on each other faces, it works.
I'm immediately going to, how can we make this virtual? I'm like, Stephen, I'm coming at you. Virtual Snowball. We need to
Virtual Snowball. Yeah.
Anybody else have something that just stands out in class that works for them that we can learn from? Okay. Yeah, okay. I won't put anybody else on the spot. It's early. I honor morning silence too. But I think what we saw even in that Snowball and a lot of things, the biggest part in engagement is kind of unchaining kids a little bit from what a lot of times we ask them to do in brainstorming or free writing that is really constrictive. The more fun, the more movement, the more choice, the more empowerment, the more we are curious about thoughts, feelings, and ideas before pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, right? That's the heart of the engagement piece. So the next part that we are going to talk about.
I wanted to add real quick, the engagement part is kind of two things, right? So one thing is just the work you've already been doing in making sure that every student's voice gets out into the room. So, one is just your voice matters. And that doesn't happen around the assignment. That's in the work that you're doing every day to provide the opportunities for kids to speak, to ask about their opinions, to connect with them, all that good work that you're already doing. And then when it comes to writing, there's this, maybe not even the second layer, it might be the fifth layer, who knows, but there's another layer of how do I engage them with this assignment. And so the work that you do to get their voice out every day is a precursor to the work that you do to say, okay, now we're going to get your voice out on this paper. And I know, it is, Allison said, this is a tough one. It is, when you have those three buckets, apathy and fear and all of that stuff, you never quite know what kids are dealing with, and it is tough. So I think the more we share as we go along, the better.
I'm gonna piggyback on that a little bit because it's something I meant to put a slide in for and didn't. In the precursor to engagement is so solidly around how much trust you have built with your students to that point. So, building the bigger, scarier writing assignments. I think probably second only to public speaking, writing is anxiety inducing. And it is a skill that is built, and they really have to trust that they can take some risks with you, and that they know that you actually really do care and want to know what they think. And that happens way off the page. That happens before we ever see, what they're writing down. It's that they are able to express that, and that comes from all of the beautiful work and relationship building that you guys are doing all the time. Okay, so hopefully, fingers crossed, now they're engaged, they've had some fun, they've had some laughs, they understand what they're doing. Now what do they do with it? Right, so this is kind of phase 2, which is plan and manage. And this is where I think it's really important that we pull it out of the abstract. This is structured. It comes from doing. That a lot of what, good writing is rewriting. It takes practice, it takes time, and we have to give students, in my experience, some really concrete action steps along the way. I think we often sit down and say, okay, write your first draft, or write your outline, or whatever, without actually working through what you need to do to get there. And that's part of why it's so scary. So I put these, rather than 3 buckets, which kind of can slosh around and mix together and be drained away. These are steps. These are steps up a ladder. They are more structured. They are more directed. To get informed, to select and organize your ideas, and then to give it shape. And walk through a few strategies I use around each of those. And then again, we'll pause and kind of share. So if anything strikes you that you might want to share, make a note of it, and we'll pause and discuss. So the first step on this ladder is to get informed about the topic. This is where we are asking them to gather information, check your facts, test your theories. Before you can write well, you have to know what you want to say and what you think about it. So I walk them through some very specific questions that I actually want them to answer. And I usually ask them to write their answers to these questions down in some form. Sometimes in some of the global courses, you'll see these in our assignments for Mizzou Academy writing assignments. Sometimes they submit them, as a journal, so we can kind of see the process. Sometimes I just, use your notes app in your phone, or however you want to do it, but actually record your answers to these questions. What is the question that you want to answer? Sometimes this takes them right back to the writing prompt. What do you already know about this? What do you know for sure? What are you confident about? This is what I know. What more do you need to know or understand about this before you can write about it confidently? And where can you go to find that information? And actually document those steps that they need to take before they start outlining or drafting. That is around getting informed. Next slide, please. So this is something that I use when we are trying to answer those questions. And we talked about this earlier. understanding the key concepts, underlining, highlighting, reading that critically, right? There's a next step to that. And this one is, I call it flip it and reverse it in honor of Missy Elliott, the first female rapper inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But to look at the prompt and work it backwards. So as they've gone through and underlined and circled each key thing in the prompt, I then ask them to number them. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll show you what I mean by that. This is the same prompt we looked at before, right? They have gone through, they have circled, analyze, character, theme, they've circled those key things. Now I've numbered them. So going in the correct order, the first one is main character's blind spots. The second one, the writer reveals this, third, and I've numbered them. Now I want them to work backwards. What is the story's central theme? And frame it as a question. How does characterization reveal that theme? How does the writer reveal what the character's blind spot is? What is the main character's blind spot? A lot of times when we write prompts, you'll see that kind of the heart of what we want them to do comes at the end. And on the way, we've laid down some premises for them. And by working the prompt backwards, they're learning how to interrogate those premises. They're questioning those premises. They have to find out what they think the blind spot is. And that's where they're going to find the information they need to dig into the prompt to get at what we are actually asking them to do, right? So their final writing wouldn't necessarily build in this order, but as they're figuring out what they need to know, as they're informing themselves about what they want to write, they need to dig into the prompt and figure out what their interpretation is or what their thesis is, right? So this is just the work the prompt backwards is one of my cues. Okay, we can go to the next one. And Stephanie, I don't know, I'll talk for a little bit about this. I don't know if you can share. I have it queued up on mine if you want to switch, but if you can share the graphic organizers piece in just a second. When they don't have that specific a writing prompt, because we know that a lot of writing assignments are more open than that, pick a topic, or it doesn't have those exact premises laid out. I really encourage graphic organizers in addition to just outlining, because depending on the topic, things build in different orders. They have to figure out their thinking around it. So sometimes it looks like a Venn diagram. Sometimes it looks like the arrows or a mind mapping sort of thing. So we have in the Learning Library, and quick plug for the open access resources tomorrow. If you're available, we will be walking through some of these resources in the Mizzou Academy Learning Library, but this is available to everybody, your students, the general public, everybody in Canvas. If you go to the Learning Library on shelf 8, there's writing strategies shelf, and in there is the free graphic organizer template, free to download.
So yes, so here are all of our resources. I'll put in a little plug for the AI presentation coming up, because soon-ish you will see another resource appear here all about how to use AI effectively with students, ChatGPT, and many, many other resources. But what we're talking about today is
writing strategies.
Writing strategies.
Shelf 8, writing strategies.
Shelf 8.
And again, in the open access resources, we'll walk through this more. And then if you will scroll down, the second link there, graphic organizers. And this, you don't need to worry about finding this link right now. Like I said, this is available to you all the time, but we can include a link. And then underneath visit, we link you to free downloadable graphic organizers that you can download, print out, share with your kids. There are a ton of them. They are applicable to just about any kind of writing assignment. you know, if you're sequencing, if you're investigating, if you're explaining process, if any of that stuff. So this is just a really concrete tool that we can link you to it directly. We can show you how to do it. We're happy to answer, you know, if you have trouble finding it. But again, it's in that learning library. Your kids can find it anytime. If you want to go find one for a specific assignment, please do it. It's such an important part of the process, I think, in organizing thoughts, ideas, and information before we start writing. Getting organized just makes magic happen. Okay, if we can. There we go. And yeah, again, so lots of different things. Okay, next slide. All right, so before we go much further, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that the things we're talking about is a huge challenge because we don't have time, right, for this kind of process work. And a lot of my students and even myself have to acknowledge this is time intensive, it's labor intensive, and making space for this kind of early process work is or can be hard. And it takes intentionality and it takes give and take. And so prioritizing it can be difficult. Rob, it's difficult for me. It's much easier to say, okay, this is homework, go home and do process work and give me your final draft, right? So acknowledge that, validate it. They are all overwhelmed. We are all overwhelmed, particularly if we're asking to evaluate their early process work. This is something we struggle with. Like, I would love to see every draft and every outline and talk kids through the process. And it's not always realistic to do that. We've got the world on our shoulders here, teachers. You know, we know this, it's hard. But this is the case I would make for doing it. First of all, we've talked about the engagement in the process. It's going to help. On a practical level, it also makes it possible. I'm a huge believer in chunking. You know, time is scarce and attention spans are short. Our students are less and less accustomed to sitting down for an hour at a time and just being able to write uninterrupted and focused. Our brains and their brains rarely work that way anymore. So the process that I give them in this step in the planning and organize is chunking, small, manageable goals every step along the way. I never ask my kids to sit down and brainstorm, outline, and first draft in a single session. Sometimes I don't even ask them to complete those 4 questions. What do I know? What do I need to know? Where am I going to find it? Sometimes I'll have them answer just one question at a time. Right? 5 minutes, one thing, answer this one question, and then go do something else, whether that's in class or if you're doing it at home, if they're working online in one of our courses and we're advising them about how to approach this. One thing, however long that takes you, but give your full attention for 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes. Answer that one thing. And then once it's done, let it go. And then you can come back with a clear, fresh mind and devote another 5 or 10 minutes to the next one thing. And it may seem counterintuitive because I know a lot of our students are like, oh, well, I'll just sit down and do this one lesson, or I'll spend an hour on English. And it's time rather than task. And I really believe that 2 really mindful minutes is more effective and efficient and works faster than a distracted hour. And so it's going to help them with that forward progress, forward motion. And so, chunking is a life skill and it's a time management strategy, and it makes for more efficient writing and it makes writing faster. And that's something they need to kind of see in process, because once you get that momentum going, it actually saves them time, right? Mindfulness is a direct result of this kind of chunking. If you can focus for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and let everything else go during that time by shortening that time, you're going to build your capacity for attention and focus. And once you're doing that, you're going to be able to expand the amount of time that you are able to focus in that way. And that's where we get in the zone for writing, where you are able to let ideas flow in a focused way and the distractions fall away, and you really feel like you're finding that connection with what you're writing. So those are, I walk them through that specific process of chunk it, focus, and then gradually expand the time that you're doing that, and it will help. Okay, next slide, please. All right, so rather than calling it writing a first draft, which I think my students anyway, naturally resist. They don't think of it. They will write it one time and then proofread it for spelling errors, right? It's, it's a first draft doesn't mean a lot to them. And so instead I like to call it giving it shape. And this is just a fun cartoon. This is from our grammar lab. Again, if you're attending open access resources tomorrow, we'll walk through the grammar lab, but this is the kind of way we hook them into this. But it's like, if you can read, it's the holiday season. You've opened your gift of the perfect essay, and you probably can't read it, but in 10 there at the box, some assembly required, right? So they have to put it together. And the first step in that process is just to give it a shape, figure out generally what it's going to look like. And that is not always a 5-paragraph essay. It's not always the put it in the formula. They want to figure out how to give it the shape they want it to have. Next slide, please. So I think about it in kind of that some assembly required box. Instruction manuals help when they have a picture. They need to have something they can look at before they go into making revisions and editing and all of that, and they give it shape. So when they're writing deeply, I try to help them picture themselves as designers, as engineers of how they want this piece of writing to look and sound and flow. I want them to think about all of those ideas that they've generated and recorded during the engagement phase, and to think of them like balls of clay that they're getting ready to sculpt. Each one as its individual thing that they're going to sculpt together into the general shape that they want it to be. This helps them with paragraphing, by the way, when they're thinking of each one of those ideas as its own ball of clay. It helps them find what that main idea is and put it together with the other things to create one whole shape. So I try to play with that analogy. I sometimes will bring something tactile into it when I'm with them in person, where they can actually, put an idea on a ball of clay and stack it so they can see how it connects. So once they have that foundation in place, then they're able to come back in the stages of revising and editing to play with it, but they have to have that sculpture shape first, and they tend to connect with that. So this is just to take kind of a step back at the whole thing. If they are still struggling with these ideas, I also try to give the writing process itself some shape for them. If they're not getting what I'm saying as we're talking about writing and revising, I give them this as just a way to think about it, mostly because they really like the shark with the thumbs up. I don't care how old they are. I have 3rd graders, I have 18-year-olds who just love this shark. And it's something that their little cheerleading shark that can come to them in exam situations when they have to write. Sorry, my sunshine just got very weird. But yeah, so write like a shark. And it's active, a little predatory, but if you're going to attack the problem, right? But it's giving a shape to the whole process we've been talking about. Study the question first. Really think about what it is you're trying to do and why. Harness your strengths, right? You've got ideas. You've got something to say. You are clever. You do this all the time. Play to that. Pull it into what you're writing. I personally subscribe to the theory that everything is an argument. I know that some writing assignments don't ask that, but everything that we write is you presenting your ideas to the world. There is something that you want to communicate, and you want the person reading it to hear you, to persuade them in some way that your ideas are worth hearing. So bring some argument into it, step back and regroup. This is kind of the giving it shape. Go back to the prompt again. Are you doing what it asked you to do? reassess, circle back, and then close strong. So I'm giving them sort of this general shark shape of what the writing process looks like. And it helps them kind of visualize and pin down the step-by-steps as we go. So those are some strategies I use for selecting and organizing ideas in this middle frame of the writing process that we usually think about as drafting, right? What works for you? What questions do you have? What challenges do you see? Let's take a minute to learn from you guys if you have something you can share with us. Let me pose this question. Do your writers draft, genuinely draft? Like, do you see them do like writing more than once? Or not so much? Yeah, overwhelming, not skilled writers. A lot of my writers want to skip this give it shape step. And again, I do find that it helps them to think about it in a different way than a first draft, because they feel like they're having to write it twice, which when you're feeling overwhelmed is unhelpful. Like if you don't want to do it, one time, asking you to do it twice is, yeah, exactly, is hard, right? So this is the giving it shape sort of helps. I also, when we're talking about graphic organizers and outlining, particularly in essay situations, but this also is helpful in story writing and other kinds of creative writing situations, is I try to get them to do topic sentence outlines, and just, leave space on a page and just write your one main idea. Like if you've gathered all of your thoughts, and the give it shape can be sparser. And this is part of the chunking part too. It's like, okay, you don't want to sit down and write a whole first draft. Give me in some sort of shape, your key points, your main ideas in the shape of what that writing is going to look like. And then come back in behind it another time to sort of fill in it. The first draft can build out in that sort of chunking way that helps, again, it's hard to get me to sit down and write a full, complete, dry run of anything, start to finish. That's a big task. And there are lots and lots of ways to break that down and start to give it shape before they have a full, before just sit down and write. Yep. Correcting mistakes, improving grades. Yep. Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, when they don't actually feel like they're doing it. And I think that's some of the, when I'm using the clay analogy, it's a lot of that, right? Some of this is just, we've heard these words so many times, and it's so daunting when you tell anybody, sit down. I'm so sorry about my sunlight. I'm sitting in front of a window. Yeah, they're interested in the grade. Oh, we're getting there. We're getting to that. Yes. And this is one of the buckets, like, I'm only worried about getting the grade. This comes back to some engagement things too, that, for our high achievers, especially, they're going to write to formula or tell you what they think you want to hear, right? They're like, okay, Mrs. Scales has told me everything that Romeo and Juliet means, so I'm going to parrot that back to her, tell her all the things that she said that I think are exactly right, and I'll get an A. And that, again, to echo this, so much of this comes down to the relationship building that we do before we ask them to write. They have to believe that you really want to hear what they think, right? It really comes down to that. And I have told my students that when I'm doing writing workshops, I'm like, the only thing that's going to hurt their grade is if they tell me what I already know. Right? Like, if I'm giving them an assignment prompt and we've already talked about it in class, like, I know what I know. I want to know what you know. I want to know what you think. Like, if you're parroting my own words back to me, that's the only thing that's going to hurt you. And lots of low stakes chunking assignments. A lot of these, though, I do incentivize them. When I'm able in class to give them some of this chunking work, this writing work, that it is going to matter to their grade, or that they are required to, you know, something. Because sometimes if they are only worried about their grade, and let's be honest, sometimes that's where we are in life, right? I got to do it, and I need an A in this class. So what do I do to get the A? And so I really do try to tie my writing assignments into what I'm assessing is how well you're communicating what you think, and giving that some stakes to them. So
Can I pick on Verena? I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right, and I've talked to you. Is that correct? Okay. I want to pick on Verena for a minute because you were just talking about that in the chat. How do you make time? Can you explain what you were saying in the chat and how you make time for that in your classroom?
I can try. I won't say I will always do that, but when we do have time, I try to plan backwards. So I know that I want to finish this by, I don't know, a month from here. So today we'll do a question. And then next week we'll come back to that question and do something else and something else. So we're kind of building up on what they did before. And they only realize that's what they were doing once we are pretty much done. So there's less complaining involved.
Well, that's great. We want that.
That's interesting. And that's it. It's such an interesting way, and so much of what we know about our kids, and it can be different for different kids and different groups of kids, right? So for a lot of my students back in the engagement process, like I say, I try to preview for them. Like, you are going to be writing this big essay, and it is going to be due in 2 months, and this is why we're doing it, and tell them up front what they're going to be doing, and then work it. But I think you're right, for a lot of kids, not realizing what they're doing along the way is probably more better. Just like we're just doing it, and oh look, you wrote an essay.
Yeah,
you know,
I would say I actually do both. Like, I tell them this is going to become a project at some point, and okay, we'll get there. But right now, let's focus on this, and then it usually works out.
Yeah, I really like that, and doing that and pulling in the variety, doing both, I think is so huge, because that's a lot of times once you say this is going to be an essay or a project, it's done. They're just thinking about the grade at that point. So working into the curriculum some of those things that are surprise, look what you just did, can then help once it's time to create. That's brilliant. I love that.
And it helps both. I think it helps. I think it helps both the students who are really anxious about grades and doing projects the way they think we want them to do the projects, and the students that are actually just there and they really want to, you know, learn and enjoy the moment, but not really concerned with grades in the end of it.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, I've got some. Stephanie, I have some ideas for curriculum work, and yeah. Anybody else? I saw a hand somewhere. No, anybody else? Okay. Well, let's go ahead and work through this last bit. So on that third step in the ladder, which in the writing process terms, we generally call revising and editing, which, you know, you want to watch a whole group of students cringe. It's time to revise and edit, right? They generally think of it just like proofreading. So they generally think of this last stage in the writing process as proofreading. It is not just proofreading. And so in the same way that I try to give them some other language around it, some other analogy way to think about it, I think of this last part of the writing process as finding your voice. And it's really a harmony of a lot of different things. It's about being precise, about, you know, saying what you mean and communicating clearly. And I think a lot of them have that intuitively. They know that that's what they're trying to do once they get to editing. But it's also about connection. This is where I try to remind them to be aware of audience, to be aware of what they're trying to communicate, how they're trying to communicate it. Deep writing is a way that we are present in the world. And so it is really important to think about writing as an act of sharing, an act of giving, and that it will leave an imprint on the people who receive them. And I think, at least for my students right now, so much of what they do is on screens where they're not necessarily aware that there's somebody else on the other side, or when they write it and turn it in, they're thinking only of the particular teacher who's grading it. And so I do want to remind them, like, this is a lasting thing. It is a shared two-way street of communication. Your reader is on the other side of that. And to think about that as an act of connection. And then to find a way, and this circles back to engagement a little bit, it's all cyclical, but the importance of authenticity and what we mean by authenticity and finding their authentic voices. So we're going to work through those 3 little things, some strategies I use to try to get them to hear, and then we'll talk again. All right, Steph, if we can go to the next. All right, so this is another one from the Grammar Lab. Like, why is it important to be clear and precise when we write? And it's like, because you are trying to communicate and people need to understand what you're saying. We do a lot of humor in the Grammar Lab, or we try. So next slide, please. So one of the things that I try to do, and I do this a lot with my own early drafting, because I do like to model my own process. I like to show them just how truly chaotic and often bad my early drafts are when I start writing. But I try to model for them and show them examples of imprecise voice. Show them what doesn't work, because they know it when they see it. Things like broad sweeping generalizations, circular reasoning. We have writing humor assignments where they're, asked to explain why something is, it's funny because it made me laugh. The circular, what are you actually saying? Vague language, the filler, being passive, all of the, of course, but that's just my opinions, all of the ways that we hedge and pull back where you're not being precise. They know that. They know it when they see it. And I like to give them examples of it so that they can find it in their own writing when they go back. And so next slide, please. And then give them some ways to correct it. And this, kind of like the engagement process and everything, a lot of this happens on the way to voice. It's why those early stages of the writing process matter. If you have really done that work in getting informed first before you start writing, if you have really done that work in giving it some shape and writing down those topic sentences and filling in the details, then you can have confidence in what you're saying. And once you have that confidence, say it. Say exactly what you mean. And here's the big one, trust that what you have to say matters. And that's where, the people who are worried about the grade and, and everything else, it's like, what you are writing about this really matters. So say it, say what you mean, say it exactly, be precise. And this is, so a lot of this is work that has come up to this. So, how do we get them there? How do they know whether or not they're being precise? How can they recognize it? What do they do about it? So one of the strategies that I give them is role reversing. Once they have a first draft in place, or at least whatever semblance of a first draft they can get into place, whether that's a topic sentence outline, any of those things, take a break. Ideally, I like to give them a whole day for this, at least, if it's one of those that you're building over months, a little bit more, but at least 10, 15 minutes. You've written your draft or your outline. If you can go do some yoga, take a nap, have a snack, engage in some other activity in class, whatever, and then come back to your rough draft or your outline, but come back to it as if you are the reader, not as the writer. Come back to it as if you have never seen it before and read it all the way through. Is it something that you would want to read? Is it clear to you? Right? I encourage them to read it aloud so that they can hear it. Because a lot of times when we're reading our own writing, stuff doesn't resonate. But if you can hear it, it helps you process from start to finish what you've written. And think about yourself like the audience. Would I want to read this? Is it clear to me? Does it matter? Am I saying something important? The next one is Q&A. So this is where we might pull in some peer review or a family member parent review, right? But I put some rules around this because I think the tendency for a lot of students is just to hand mom or dad or a partner in class the essay. Can you read this? Tell me what you think, right? They have no context for that. So my first rule around this is whoever you are asking to read your essay for you, which is a wonderful support if you can have it, is you have to give them the complete assignment prompt first. Whether you say it to them or show it to them in writing, the person who's reading your essay and giving you feedback has to know what that purpose was to begin with. Don't paraphrase it for them. Don't tell them, oh, this is about World War II, right? Actually let them see what the assignment prompt was asking for, because then they know what they're reading for, right? And then just let them read it. Just hand it to them, let them read it, start to finish, without your commentary or anything else, without interrupting. And then rather than having them kind of point by point make suggestions, do a little talkback session, a little Q&A, right? Ask them to tell you what your main idea was or what your supporting evidence was. Have them kind of paraphrase it back to you and see if they got it right. Did they understand it? Or was something off? Did something not translate? And encourage them to ask you questions. What more do you need to know? You know, not just what do I need to improve, but what more do you need to know from me? And make that a conversation between writer and reader, whoever is reading your paper. And that's going to help them figure out whether or not they were going to be precise and whether or not they're connecting with the person who's reading their paper, right? And then if they're really struggling with this, and this can be an earlier process, a selection and organization strategy too, but if you're just getting to that editing stage and it's not making sense, right? Whatever your reader was saying, or you're coming back, it's just not coming together. I love mystery shows and the evidence boards where you put up all the little pieces of evidence and you take the red yarn and show how it all connects the dots. Try it. Sometimes I will physically cut up an outline or an essay draft and put it on a big board and break out the yarn and see how the points connect to each other, or which ones seem sort of out there and unrelated, which don't have a clear connection to each other, and use that to put it back together. Shake it up in a way that makes sense. And these are all ways that we get down to what are you really trying to say, and is it coming together start to finish in the way that you intended it to?
I just want to point to the chat really quickly. There's a lot of good stuff happening in the chat. We're going to collect those ideas and we'll send them with our resources, but I just want to have you guys glance in there because a lot of people are sharing their very workable ideas for that. You're going to see Gina pop up in the chat. She is on our team. She's a specialist with Jill Klingon. And Gina is an experienced teacher, a writer. She's published books. She's amazing. Shout out to Gina. And you'll see her to the side sharing her tips for how she's put these things into action with her students. Thank you, Gina.
Thank you, Gina.
And all the others too.
Yeah, everybody.
Lots of
Thank
good
you so
teacher
much.
tips happening.
So much good practical stuff going on. But yeah, so if you're using that storyboard, just, one of the things that really helps with for me in the kind of editing and revising stage is transitions. Using that, sort of connect the dots boards or, writing out your main ideas is helping them build transitions. And I try to help them think of it like, everything you write, ultimately you are telling a story. You are going from beginning to middle to end. How does this all connect? What story are you trying to tell? And sometimes that helps to connect them with it too. So the other thing that you are going to find, and I won't go through all of these, but you will find them in your resources for this, is self-evaluation. And a lot of times we ask our teachers or our partners or our parents, read this, is it okay? or we go back through and we proofread for spelling and grammar errors, and that's all we do, and we consider that edited. In this last stage of finding voice, I like to have them do several rounds of, again, focus, chunking, short, but have them read their drafts for something specific, right? You know, to look at your thesis. Is it clear? Is it specific? Do you have something that you want to prove? Is your reader gonna, is it at, where is it? Is it at the beginning? Is it, you know, where do you find it? Have them read for that. Same thing around organization and evidence, rather than just revise your essay. Okay, take your first draft and look at its organization. Just that. Does everything make sense? Is everything clearly connected? If it's not, revise for that. Same thing around word choice. Where are you, you know, how many varies do you have in there, right? Like how many, you know, all of that, you know, have them read for something specific. And in our resources, you will find some of these self-evaluation guides that that I use, that I give to them, and they're all kind of in one place. But as wherever I can, whenever I can, I like to give them one thing at a time, rather than doing all of it at once. And so the very last thing I ask them to do is proofread for their punctuation and mechanics. Like I want them to be evaluating for substance, voice, communication, tone, reading for those things separately, and then go back and check your punctuation. That it's like, it's a different thing, and I want to get them to that place. So again, in the resources, I've included the specific questions that I ask them to consider when they do it. And I think, yeah, so one of the things that the little mnemonic tips and tricks, kind of like sculpting the clay, the step ladders, the action steps, all of this, I throw this into most of my courses before, you know, the editing stage of any draft, is that we use the word revision. We throw it around. What does it mean? And I almost always use the word revisioning rather than revision. I really want them to come at their drafts with the idea that this is where you want to trust yourself enough to take some risks, where you really want to check yourself for what's working, celebrate your strengths, and also where things need to be clearer, and be willing to bring some imagination, some play, some creativity to this part of the process. This should be if you've done all of the early work, this should be the fun part. This is where the inspiration should come, because now you know what you want to say, where you're going, and you get to be the artist in here. You get to take some risks and see the rewards of those risks. So I like to, again, just separate it from proofreading and bring it back to revisioning. Next slide. All right, authenticity. This one is the tough one, and I was going to put it on a screen, but I was absolutely fascinated, and I actually sent a screenshot to one of our grammar support teams. But it's like the Merriam-Webster's 2023 Word of the Year, which means the most searched word on their site for 2023 was the word authentic, which just absolutely fascinated me. Because how many of us, our kids, our students, literally and figuratively now, are searching for what is authentic? And I think, and another plug for Stephanie's AI session tomorrow, especially in this world of AI, of our on-screen avatars that are so carefully curated and cultivated. You know, all of the ways that we are trying to wade through misinformation, disinformation, and opinion versus fact. What is real in this world? And that it was the most searched word of 2023 just resonated with me in such a profound way, because I think we are all searching for it. And the writing process is one of those ways that we can ground kids in really examining first and exploring, and then expressing what is authentically them. It's where you find it. It's how you speak it. Deep writing should provide a glimpse into you, both for yourself and for your readers. What you value, how you think, what you bring to the table. So if we're doing it right, it should help us discover that and also express and share it. And so hopefully when you work this whole process with them, the end goal, what we want to end up with, is something that is real, that is honest, and that is meaningful. So that's what the goal is, and hopefully through this work in your class, they can find that and have confidence that it's something they can value, and that it's something that we value, and that the world values and needs more of. So that's how I try to approach voice with them. And again, I want to just take a minute to point you back, and I'll let Stephanie talk about this too. Both of these open access resources we'll talk about more in the session tomorrow and demo some of how they work, but just to highlight for you, one of them we showed you with the graphic organizers, but there is a whole shelf in our Mizzou Academy Learning Library on writing strategies that go through generating ideas and brainstorming to organizing to drafting to revising. And these are steps and tools and activities that you can pull and use in your classrooms, or you can refer your students to them. I will do this a lot with my kids when I'm seeing them basically turn in a first draft and I know they need to do more process work. I will send them to the learning library and say, try some of these exercises. It will help you earn that grade. If you are worried about that grade, go here. These are the things we're looking for. This is what's going to get you there. And I can send them there as a place where they can work, or it can be done in class. Again, open to you, open to students, open to parents, open to everybody. And the second is group 7 of our grammar lab. Our grammar lab does a lot of very targeted mini lessons around things like run-on sentences and punctuation and all of that stuff we all need. But that last group is specifically about this last stage of the writing process around voice, and it is editing for style and tone and audience and expression and authenticity and finding that. And there are, like I said, we'll demo some of these, more of these tomorrow, but I just want to make you aware of it. Again, open access to everybody. You can use it in class or refer students to it. If you have one of those kids who's they have the best ideas, but their writing isn't expressing it yet, this is the kind of thing where you can send them to go get some practice and some of those things. Okay. Thoughts on voice, authenticity, getting kids to share and believe and value? What works for you? Yes, positive feedback. I am a huge believer in celebrating strengths. And we actually really try to do this in our Mizzou Academy writing assignments as we're working with our specialists, our leads, our everybody. We train for this. That the very first thing we want to do, and all the way through as we're talking about improvements and encouraging growth, is recognizing their strengths, acknowledging, celebrating, making sure they know we see the good stuff that's happening in there is really important. Yeah. Opportunities. Yeah, absolutely. I love one of my favorite assignments that we do in AP is just taking one of their graded assignments and giving them the, and then we've done a whole bunch of writing process work and say, okay, go back to that thing that you wrote in lesson 2, now that we're in lesson 7, and redo it. And and I reward that. We incentivize it. We give points for it. But it's like, okay, now you've done all of this work. Now you know all of these things that you didn't know before. Now go look at what you did first and grow it and bring it back and see what you can do with it. And that usually is a surprise for them. I know we were talking about sometimes surprising, and it's about, so they have something they've already written, and I won't tell them they're going to revisit it. But then we do a bunch of process work along other things and give them a chance to go back, and having those opportunities to see how far they've come, to look at their writing side by side and go, look at all the things I can do now that I wasn't sure I could do before. It's great. So many suggestions about citations. Yes, 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 yes. Okay, so I will, I'm going to keep this suggestion about citations brief, but there will be, again, in open access resources, we had a whole section on this in citations that they can use. So we have lots of stuff for that. In general, as a matter of the writing process, the first thing that I will, let me organize my own thoughts here around this. So the first thing I want to make sure students know when they are using outside resources, and we'll talk about this in the AI session, I'm sure, and in the, around academic integrity, we have this in the learning library, is that, we all go to outside resources. I think a lot of times when we tell students to use their own voice and be authentic and do all of that, they think we're telling them not to look anything up. Of course, we look things up. We all look things up. We all, we need that support from outside. But teaching the value of giving credit, just if you're taking an idea and anything that you found from an outside source, to quote it if you're using their words, and then to cite it. And like I said, we have a lot of these resources in there for how to do that, the actual how to include citations. On an extremely practical level, we use Turnitin as a tool in Mizzou Academy, right? And it will show a Turnitin score of how much of your writing is matching to another source. That actually can be a really valuable tool. If we can show, hey, you know what? If 39% of your paper is somebody else's voice, we're not hearing what you're thinking. It's, even if you're citing correctly, even if you're, if you're pulling if 75% of your writing, yes, they are not able to, that is true. And I need to figure out how to do that. Because a lot of times I'll go back with students after they turn something in and show it to them, just so they can get a feel for it. Because especially if they are properly citing their sources, that's different from plagiarism. That's, it's a different thing. If they've got citations in there, it's just that 75% of their essay is quotations or whatever. So I'm not hearing their voice. So I'll go, if I see it, I will actually go back to them and say, okay, if you've lost points for this, let me show you one thing that's happening is this Turnitin score, and I can show it to them and talk it through them.
Rebecca, let me do some checking on that too, because if not Turnitin, and Stephen may know, he's on here. Well, I don't want to, let me look into that. Stephen.
Yeah.
They cannot see, the students cannot see their Turnitin
Okay.
or where it's saying it's pulling the stuff from.
Even if they there's no option to work in drafting mode with Turnitin or anything like that.
I don't think we allow students any access.
And I don't know if Grammarly does, but some
There
tools
are
like
things out there, so let me check into that. And Rebecca, if I forget in my conference haze, please remind me, and we'll see if there are some tools we can use to share for that.
Yeah. But yeah, in terms of the academic integrity shelf in our learning library, goes into a lot of this, both the practical how-tos, when to cite, how to cite, we tell them all of that, and also walk them through, how much, again, it's the, how can you tell in a paragraph if you've got too much of other people's things and what you're bringing to it. And there's a slide you'll see several times tomorrow in Stephanie's session, and also one that I fully stole from her, but I'll be giving her full citation and attribution for. But the biggest thing around citations for us as a philosophy is, again, coming back to valuing their voice. We actually want to know what you think and what you have to say. And if you're citing, make sure you're doing it to support something you have already said. It should be evidence for what you think, as opposed to you just telling me what somebody else thinks. And that shelf 9 in the learning library really kind of walks them through both why that's important, how to recognize it, how to think about it. And that's part of just, fostering that in our classrooms, that it's just like, it's not just a matter of being honest, though being honest is hugely important. But it's that, start from what you think rather than starting from the outside places. Yeah, sharing rating. This is something that I like to do too. And it's, there are some benefits of learning virtually. There are some things that I can do that are harder to do in a classroom. A lot of, my virtual students aren't in class together sometimes, and on the global side, they are spread out. And so virtually I can share student writing, but remove personal information. But what I can do with those students is I ask their permission. And I said, this is such a great essay. Do you mind if I share this with future classes as an example? And they're not in the room when I'm reading it in front of other people. Other people are not feeling like their essay was not selected in that moment. But by asking permission, both because it is the ethically responsible thing to do, an obligation to do, to ask for permission to share, but also just I am connecting one-on-one with the student saying, hey, this was fantastic. I'll remove your name if you want me to, or I'll just remove your name. I'll be removing your name, but is it okay with you if I show other students what you did here? And what that does for them is so phenomenal. And I really do try to do that a lot.
I think that's
Okay.
a nice place to end because it's student-centered, right? And that's what this is all about. And there are so many nuances and so many things to think about. This is just, the figurative tip of the iceberg when we're talking about these things. But I just want to just send a big thank you to all of you for your attention today and for all the communication and the great ideas you've been sharing. I always say I learn so much with this group every time. And I learn a lot from Karen, and I want to send a big thank you to Karen for leading us in this today. And thank you all for coming. And it is time for a break, and we will see you back this afternoon. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.